I'm Katie Bennett-Stenton, a senior B2B marketer with 20 years experience across the UK, United States and Asia Pacific. Last year, I was fortunate to spend 3 months with Deloitte in Chicago. During that time, I was delighted to have the opportunity to spend time with a number of global experts. Throughout that period, I interviewed a range of leaders and shared their thought-provoking, relevant and influential takeaways. Now that I'm back in Melbourne, the Katie Talks conversation with influencers continues, and I'm really excited about today. I'm interviewing Sean Hall, who's the founder and chief energist of Energix. Sean, welcome.
Great to be here. Thanks, Katie.
Be really interesting before we get into the questions, Sean, if you can just tell us a little bit about your background and what you do now, please.
So I'll say that I'm on my 5th career, and so Energist is actually a combination of really what's gone on in my life, I guess, right from being young worker stepper at 18, and so there's a good diversity there in terms of everything from starting my career in fitness to advertising, being on agency side, through to technology, telco, and then finally HR. And so what I do today with Energix is we're a wellbeing and human performance company. And really what we specialize in is helping organizations identify the burnout risk that exists in their teams, and then using that data, using an approach that's endorsed by the University of Sydney Business School, actually prevent that happening. And in doing so, increase the capacity within that team, whatever that capacity is needed for, whether that's to grow, be agile, create, innovate, adapt, learn, whatever that's needed, that's what we have to do.
Sean, this is so interesting. Over 2 or 3 podcasts I've published earlier this year, this topic, energy and burnout, has come up a few times just organically as part of the conversation. And I've been interested both in the fact that it comes up a number of times, but also in the feedback that I've had from people who have been listening. I've had a lot of people contact me in a way, with quite a hushed tone, sort of feeling like it's something that they shouldn't really talk about, but that it really resonated and that they either experience burnout or really low energy, or they're really, really worried about it. And that has fascinated me. I mean, it's something that resonates with me personally, but I was really excited to meet you and to be able to explore this in some more detail.
Well, I'm not surprised to hear that. I feel that there really just generally is a stigma around us admitting that we're not at our best. We're hearing, I guess, a lot more focus in terms of trying to break that stigma around things like mental health.
Yeah.
Really, it's much broader than that, that we can actually be vulnerable and know that we're not perfect all of the time. I sort of talk about my coming out, right?
Yeah, sure.
To talk about my burnout, or as I call it an energy crisis, because really what a lot of people are talking about is they simply just don't have any gas left in the tank. They're running on empty.
Sure.
And that creates, leaves us vulnerable to things like burnout or more serious issues.
Absolutely. And Sean, in your TEDx talk, you talk about your own personal experience. Be wonderful if you could talk to us about the energy crisis that you experienced. And for anybody who hasn't watched, I really recommend that they do. But would love to hear more about your story, please.
Thanks, Katie. So back in 2011, I got quite a remarkable career opportunity. So I was at Telstra at the time, and I was promoted into the role of general manager of brand strategy and marketing, and my responsibility at that time was leading a massive brand transformation project. So to take Telstra's brand essentially from this old, I guess, publicly associated brand, being the colours of the navy and orange that people might remember, to a brand that was more expressive, that was more reflective of the diversity of our customers and our products, and to really change that to being all the colours. And that meant I was leading a virtual team of about 300 people, and we had a shorter time frame to do this in, because there was a real strategic need for us to be seen differently in the market, with NBN sort of coming down the tracks towards us.
Sure.
And we knew that our customers needed to see us differently and talk about us differently. What that meant for me personally was that I'd often leave work at 2 a.m. I'd be back at 6, and I sort of did this for about 6 months, until I had this moment, which I talk about in my TED talk, where I found myself one day wandering around the fancy accessories, men's accessories part of the David Jones store in the Sydney CBD. And I sort of joked that that was unusual for a couple of reasons. The first being that, I don't buy $1,000 man bags. That's not really the top part of the store I would spend my time in usually. But secondly, why it was unusual is that day I had no idea how I got there. And so I just remember thinking, customers that had seen me probably would have thought I looked a bit dazed and confused actually that day, but I was actually feeling all sorts of crazy on the inside. And what snapped me out of it was I was lucky enough to get a phone call from a friend. I have no idea what we talked about. All I just remember is how I felt, which was sort of stuck between fight and flight. My body was physically shaking, my mind was racing, and I just knew that I needed to do something differently. And I call that an energy crisis, because when I started to look for ways, I guess, to improve myself and get myself back to the Sean I was used to being,
Yes.
A lot of men's mental health resources focused on the extremes around depression, anxiety, depression, anxiety, addiction, suicide, obviously.
Yeah.
And I knew that I didn't have any of those things. I just had no gas in the tank. And unless I did something, I was probably going to be a gold star candidate for it, for one of those more serious issues. So that was really the start of just going, okay, what do I need to change?
What an amazing, well, horrendous story, but I think the fact that you share it is well, can only be incredibly helpful for people. I mean, I have only a little bit of evidence with some really strong feedback from people. Sean, you talk in your TEDx talk about the 7 energy crisis indicators. Can you talk us through those, please?
Yeah, so a big part of, I guess, getting back to myself was understanding what I had missed, because you don't wake up just one day and find yourself wandering around David Jones. There has to be warning signs, right? And so I call those energy crisis indicators, or ECIs. And what I guess I discovered is, one, that literally millions of Australians are experiencing these. And as I go through these, most people have at least 2, right?
Okay.
When I talk, most people have at least 2. Some industries, based on our research now, I'm seeing, some people are experiencing a lot more. Like I recently did some work looking at millennial women, and I found that 1 in 4 millennial women have at least 4 of these, and that's really scary. But what they are is, the first one is really about your body not being in best working order. And a lot of times when we think about wellness and well-being, we focus on the physical aspects and how we look and the aesthetic and things like this. But this is not like that. This is not about having a bikini body. This is really just thinking, if I had to run for the bus, would I almost collapse, when I got there, or struggle to get up some stairs, for instance.
Okay.
You might have an injury. You could have like back issues or neck issues, for instance, have a massive impact on well-being. You could be on medication, for a physical health issue. So it's just really these signs that, my body's not in its best working order. And that's the first one.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is really just, I guess, waking up in the morning and not being that excited about what you're going to do that day. That actually there's a lack of meaning, I guess, in what you are contributing to, or, and just sort of thinking, why am I doing this?
Yes.
Does it have a purpose? And we already know, the quite alarming statistics around employee engagement, that so few employees are actually really, truly engaged in their work.
Yes.
The next one is feeling overwhelmed. And I feel like there's sort of an epidemic going on around overwhelm that's not really being talked about, that leads to these more serious mental health issues. And often when we feel overwhelmed too, we can feel that we need to change something, right? We need to do something. Body's telling us that. However, we don't know where to start.
Sure.
It's just such again, it's like overwhelming just even going out there and thinking, where should I start? Should I start with nutrition? Should I start, with exercise? Where should I start? And so making that very practical for people is really important part of this. The next one is, and this is quite significant for me, was around negative self-talk.
Sure.
So we'll all say stuff, to ourselves that we would never say to anyone else.
Yeah, we do.
And when that voice, that inner critic, gets louder and is happening more often than we would like, that has a huge impact on our well-being, and we're just completely distracted. And I know for me, like at that point, I, was telling myself all sorts of nasty things.
Yeah.
The fifth one is just waking up tired. So few of us actually wake up feeling refreshed these days, and we know there's chronic epidemics around sleep deprivation. We've just recently seen the government actually start to look at investing in sleep as well as part of their national health strategy.
Yes.
So this is super important, because when you think about it, every day you start the day tired, you're already behind.
Yeah.
So even if you knew what you were capable of achieving, you're not going to get there, right? You're already behind. So that's a big one. The next one is really about emotional regulation. So being stressed at little things, or being irritated at little things that just get under your skin that normally wouldn't. So for parents, when you've got a lot of gas in the tank, if the kids are acting up, you can deal with it. If you're depleted, you feel like you're the worst parent on the planet. The house is falling down around you, and we know that when we are tired, our ability to regulate our emotions at work as well is impacted. So I sort of joke, there's times when you get really pissed off if someone doesn't change the toner in the photocopier, or something like that. You just go, normally that wouldn't affect me, but today that really got to me. All my favorite baristas nodded there in the morning.
Oh, well, we're getting towards the tail end of the school holidays, so your reference to the irritation in parenting resonates with me at the moment, Sean.
Absolutely, right, absolutely. We sort of judge ourselves for that as well,
We do.
And the critic comes back. And then the last one, and this is tied to where we started the conversation, is just feeling disconnected or lonely or isolated in this, because when we're tired, when we're depleted, when we're not at our best, often what we do is we actually withdraw.
Yes.
When actually what we need to do is connect. And so I know for me, because of the high profile nature of my role, I was running a $9 billion brand. There's no way that I felt I could walk into my boss's office and say, hey, just been wandering around David Jones, like there's no way I could do that. I felt like I had way too much at risk. And it really took me, a good couple of years to really start talking about this. And that was only when I felt like I was at my best again.
Okay.
And so all of those things cumulatively leave us vulnerable to an energy crisis or burnout or worse. And as I said, statistically, most Australians will have at least two of those. Probably waking up tired and overwhelmed are sort of the ones that I see as the most common.
I was going to ask if there were some that were more common than others.
Yeah, and then I would also say negative self-talk is very much up there.
Yeah.
Because these are things that we have never been taught, and they're skills. They're literally skills, and this is why it's so important for us to view well-being as a skill, as a capability around things that we just need to learn better about self-management, right? But we can do that once we have the right education and knowledge.
We can, and there's so many different tangents I'd like to go off on, Sean, but you talked about this being your fifth career and the fact that you'd spent a whole lot of time in the fitness industry. And forgive me, this is a bit of a direct question, but with that background, how did you get to the point where you were leaving the office at 2 a.m. and getting back super early?
Question, Katie, right? Because I'll say there's the irony in this, right? Is that I actually spent 16 years in the fitness industry. So
well, forgive my directness, Sean, because
if anyone should have known, right, how to look after themselves, I think I should have known. And like that's the irony's not lost on me.
Sure.
I think what I had to learn was that what I didn't know, right? So I knew a lot about, I guess, the physical aspects of well-being around moving and nutrition. I obviously wasn't acting on that knowledge at the time. But then these other factors I didn't know about what was impacting me in terms of the way I was simply managing my diary, or the fact that I was at the time, and like I will always sort of emphasize this, is I stayed at Telstra for another 4.5 years after that because I loved my job.
Okay.
And that was the thing, is I loved my job, but it was almost like I was putting so much priority into that, I was deprioritizing the other aspects of sort of looking after myself.
Yeah.
And I also think it's sort of the ironic thing is that with regards to the simplest things, so just sleeping well,
yes,
is that humans are the only species on the planet, literally, that don't value sleep. Right. So,
okay.
And so we've seen globally that the hours that we're sleeping actually have been declining, for the past sort of 3 to 4 decades. So we've made heroes of people that sort of say, only get 4 or 5 hours sleep, or if you're sleeping, your competitors up and working, all of those sorts of things, which are actually just completely unhealthy behaviors. And more we're seeing that sleep research is showing that just even one night of sleep deprivation has such a profound impact on literally every part of our human system, from losing brain tissue to regulating our emotions to making poor choices around eating due to the hormones that regulate our appetite. All of these things happen just after one night. So we just really need to start to focus on the basics.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting. I mean, and as you said earlier, until very, very recently, this hasn't been part of our public dialogue at all.
Not at all. Not at all. I think we've, I guess, almost built, a system that's actually quite mechanical in the way that it sees humans, as, I guess, elements of output, versus actually looking at them in terms of, from a more human perspective, in terms of, how you actually build personal capacity in people to actually do and be more, rather than just assume they're a unit of production, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. And that also makes me think about this growing prevalence of, when you talk to a lot of people, how are you? Oh, I'm so busy. That hero mentality of, just the busyness, so busy.
Absolutely. I actually had a really insightful conversation around that very topic with a mentor of mine, Dr. Simon Longstaff, who's the director of the Ethics Centre.
Okay.
And we sort of talked about why people are saying that, right? And a lot of it, when you come back to it, is we sort of got into this place where busyness is sort of seen as a badge of honor, and our always on nature, as well as that by being accessible, whether it's through email or social media, that actually those moments where we receive an email or receive a like or a message or whatever it might be, are actually ways in which we determine our self-worth.
Yes, we get a dopamine hit, don't we? Yeah.
Right. And so we're seeking our self-worth from external sources versus intrinsically. And I feel like there's been a real swing, in a bad way, to that. And I think especially we're seeing younger generations affected by this more.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. Sean, let's shift and talk about this from a more positive, impactful element, right? About managing our energy, not our time. What do we need to be doing on this front, Sean?
Yeah, well, I think that is one of the most important reframes we can make, right? So time will always be finite.
Yes.
We can't get more time. However, we can, by literally viewing our diaries as energy, determine what energizes us and what depletes us, and make different, smarter decisions off the back of that. I think that was a big light bulb moment for me. And when you think about it, why I think energy is such a great way for people to think about this is it's very intuitive to us. So I can ask you after any experience you have, whether that's having a conversation like this, going for a walk, spending time with your family, going shopping, or just sitting quietly alone with your thoughts.
Yes.
And I can ask you after that experience, did it energize you or deplete you?
Okay.
And you'll just know, right? You'll intuitively just know. And it can't be nothing, right? It's going to be one way or the other. It might be, a really energizing thing or a little bit energizing or the opposite, but it can't be nothing. And once we listen to that, turning, and this is what we'll say that we do at Energist, is we help people turn that natural intuition that you have around how you're feeling about your energy into intelligence. And with that intelligence, with that data, then you can make different decisions. You can work out why that experience was energizing or depleting for you.
That's interesting. I have read a bit about managing energy and not time over the last few years. After I had a virus that basically landed me in bed for 3 months, I only got into the office once a week for about 5 hours, which was really debilitating and quite a confronting experience. And I pretty significantly changed the way that I focus my life and energy after that point, because I felt like I was a bit bulletproof before that. And one of the things that I changed was that I, as a morning person, I am at my best in the morning. So I will do all of my heavy thinking or writing or strategic work first up in the morning when I'm fresh and really energized. What other sorts of things should we be thinking about on this front?
Well, that's great, first of all, that you're aware that you're a morning person, because from a sleep perspective, like I will always say the two places I would get any clients to start is with sleep first, and that starts by just understanding your chronotype, which is what you're talking about here. So your chronotype is that you're more of a morning person, and therefore there'll be times of day where you're better at, doing sort of analytical or insight type work, creative work.
Sure.
And knowing ourselves in that way is a great way of understanding how we can increase our personal effectiveness. It's quite an interesting way to look at diversity too, because we do have morning and night people, and it's about valuing both of those equally.
Sure.
I'm more of a night person, right? And so if you and I were to collaborate together, it's ideal that we do it almost like at this time that we're doing now, right?
Okay.
Because our energies are actually sort of meeting in the right place.
Yes. Okay.
However, if you tried to get me doing this at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. when you were sort of buzzing, then I would be I'd be about bumbling mess.
Sure.
So I think that's one of the key things. What is my chronotype, and then designing my sleep routine around that.
Yeah.
The second thing is really about hydration. So when you think about this, and another reframe that I really talk about in the work that we do is that we need to get away from thinking that well-being or wellness is just about the physical, because most of us in the future of work, which is already here, will be doing jobs that are based on our cognitive abilities and our very human abilities, right? So less manually based work.
Okay.
That would mean that we need our brains to be operating at their best. So our brains will operate at their best to connect, to solve creative problems, to be creative, to interact with others, to have emotional intelligence, all of those things, which are really hard to do when we're tired. And so sleep has a massive impact, obviously, on our cognitive function. Our brains are 80 to 85% water as well. And so that has a big impact. Even just a little bit of dehydration, we know, impacts our clarity of thought, but also just how we feel generally as well. So those are the two places that I start with people. And we've built a framework to help people think about this that we call the 4Fs, essentially. And the first F is fuel, which is the things that we're most, familiar with. So fitness, nutrition, sleep, recovery. So those are the foundations. And even when life feels completely out of control, they're the things that we have the most influence over. So we're energized when we sleep well and we look after ourselves physically, right?
Sure.
No brainer.
Yep.
The second F is fire. And we're energized when we really deeply understand our strengths. So we know what we're good at and we're able to apply those strengths for meaningful impact. Right. So you could talk about this in terms of your why, your purpose, there's a Japanese phrase called ikigai that we talk about. But we know what that feels like, right? If you know that you're really good at something, that feels good.
Yep.
But then when you know that those skills actually make a positive impact to someone, that feels awesome.
Yeah, sure.
Right? So being able to combine those two and understand that. And then third F is feeling, which is really starts with a relationship with ourselves. So do I have a kind, generous, compassionate, loving relationship with myself? And that's the basis for these healthy, energizing relationships with the people that we care about. And that's really where that dealing with that inner critic comes in, right, that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So if we can change if we can have our inner cheerleader being louder and more, more often speaking to us than our inner critic, we're going to be in a really good place.
Yeah.
And then finally, the fourth F is that it requires focus to create energy. And this is literally getting very, very practical about how we create more space for the stuff that energizes us, whilst we remove or reframe the things that are depleting us. And so that's where we literally talk about when I teach people to how to manage their diaries through that lens of energy. And that has a just phenomenal impact on people straight away.
This is really interesting. Sean, you shared 2 reports with me that we'll make available with this podcast, but they cited that women are twice as likely to suffer depression. And in a survey of the creative industry, over 73% of people wake up 6 days out of 10 feeling tired, which is pretty alarming. What's this all about, and what do we need to learn from it?
Yeah, so I think that discovering that statistic around women, for instance, I was really shocked. I'd never heard that before, because you do see much more commonly the focus around mental health being around men.
Yes.
And I think a big part of that is that men obviously take that more to a catastrophic level, obviously, in dealing with that.
Mm-hmm.
However, when I discovered that, what we wanted to do with our women's wellbeing report was really look at what data did we have to contribute to the conversation, because I've been lucky enough to work with over 1,000 professional women in the last 18 months, really supporting their wellbeing. And what we're finding there is that on average, women are only finding that they feel they have enough energy around sort of 48% of the time. So 4.8 hours out of 10 is sort of how we sort of look at things.
Yeah.
It has a profound impact on people in terms of their ability to both to be and feel successful. And so I think from the clients that I've talked to, one of the factors that I think is contributing to this is the number of roles or hats that a woman tends to play in her life.
Okay.
And the level of expectation being placed on herself. So I have to be a perfect mom, I have to be a perfect employee at work, I have to be a perfect wife and run the household, all these sorts of things. And then often feel like actually failing at all of those because they just don't have enough. We can't be perfect at everything. Actually chasing perfection is probably the most depleting.
Not a great constructive thing to do, is it?
Out there, right? And we know as leaders as well, perfectionism in a leader can be very, very damaging to our teams.
Yes.
So I think that's part of it. So we really wanted to contribute to that conversation. We don't have all the answers, but we definitely feel that the data is giving us some different sort of insights as to why that might be the case. And then I also work with a lot of creative clients because of my background in marketing as well. And I think that what we found there is also the creative industry seems to be suffering rates of depression and anxiety higher than other professions as well. We've found that 56% of people in the creative industry have mild to severe symptoms of depression, 55% with anxiety, which is double the national rate. And so I think we need to get under the layers here to really go, okay, well, how does this happen in the first place? So, for instance, my own journey was looking at those energy crisis indicators and how they contributed to me being in an energy crisis, being burnt out, and being vulnerable. to mental health issues as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is one of the things that we have to do, and I feel that is not so well focused on right now, is the fact that we do tend to be weighting all of our attention and energy to addressing the problems that have already arisen around mental health, and far less time and focus on preventing them happening in the first place. And I really feel that we need to do both.
Sure.
And that's where, so Energix focuses specifically around prevention and capacity building. And then the other fear I have, and this is probably might be quite an unpopular position to take, but when I look at health in general, and I see that we've done such a really poor job of looking after physical health, and the fact that Australia is the fifth fattest nation on the planet, we've got 7% of people that don't move at all or not enough. And I feel, goodness, we've done such a poor job with that. What makes us think we can do any better job with mental health? And there's one other issue that's sort of percolating in my mind too around mental health, which is sort of a scary thing on the horizon for me, is that we know that all of us are going to be displaced in some way in the next 5 to 10 years around our jobs, right? So some are going to be automated, but all jobs are going to change, okay? And the skills that are required from us, these human skills that we need, these softer skills that we need to secure a place in the future of work are going to change. And we need to do a lot of learning around those. And so we're going to see huge amounts of people. We're already seeing huge numbers of people being made redundant or transitioning out of the workforce and these sorts of things, whether that's through their, whether that's being forced or whether they've chosen that. And I've found some interesting research from the University of Wollongong, which showed that people that are made redundant experience higher rates of mental health issues, and not just them, but their partner as well. And so when we see statistics like 5 to 10 million Australian jobs being displaced or changing in the next 10 years, that to me says there's this huge wave coming towards us around mental health that we're not even talking about right now.
No, we're not, are we? And I mean, that makes complete sense in terms of mental health of somebody who is retrenched's partner being impacted as well, because of course it doesn't just impact the person who has lost their job, but their family.
Absolutely. There's actually a really interesting initiative called Transition Hub, which is a partnership with WeWork, which is actually looking at this issue as well, which is really worth checking out because they're definitely leaning directly into this.
Excellent, thank you. I will check that out, and I think a good one for listeners to be aware of as well.
Absolutely.
Sean, what's life hacking?
Life hacking. So, one of the, I'll often say like building a business and being an entrepreneur is really, really hard.
Yes.
You do have these moments, right, where you discover something that you didn't expect.
Okay.
And life hacking is one of those things for me. So when we were running our programs, we measure the impact essentially. So going into a program, we assess people using an energy intelligence assessment. As I said, that's been endorsed by the University of Sydney Business School. And then coming out of the program, we reassess them to determine their progress.
Okay.
And the return on investment, right? So I've had to learn how to speak CFO language in doing this.
Sure.
Which is not natural for a marketer, I can tell you.
No, well, as a fellow marketer, I understand.
Right. And on average, what we were able to achieve is we were able to achieve a 30% increase in people's energy intelligence, and sometimes as short as 6 weeks. But there were, which is life-changing for a lot of people when you think about it, like imagine waking up and just having 30% more energy. It's sort of hard to imagine, but
yes, please.
It literally means 3 extra days out of 10, right? That you've got more energy. So, but there were a group of outliers that got higher results than that. And I was intrigued as to what they were doing. And so we interviewed them. And what we found, and this is now what we call life hacking, is that they were combining the F's that I talked about earlier into experiences. right? So a 2F experience, for instance, is something like mindful eating, right? Where it's feeling and fuel together. I'm nourishing myself, but I'm actually taking a bit of a time out, right? To get present and focus on the food and to slow down, instead of inhaling the food like we tend to do, actually just slowing down, and that has a bigger, burst essentially of energy for that person. And then you might add another layer, like a layer of passion. So if you stick with food, for instance, it's a great one. We know how it feels when we're passionate about food, and we get to do that and nourish and nurture our friends or our family as we do that as well, because we're adding that feeling component as well with a connecting part, and we're connecting over something that's a passion of ours.
Yeah.
And then if you're able to add sort of an outcome, to that, a goal to that, that is what we end up seeing as life hacking, right? So I'm creating 2 or 3 or 4F experiences. And why this was such a moment for me is that when I asked people how that felt, they said, this feels joyful, right? And so it's literally a recipe for joy, is if we can design for ourselves these 3 or 4F experiences, and it doesn't have to be a whole day full of them. It's literally, if we can manage that, once a day, a few times a week, that can actually have a massive impact on our well-being, especially if we're planning that in, right? There's a sense of anticipation and looking forward to that as well. And so this is where we say it's so simple. So often I'll coach my clients just to start their day by literally writing on a Post-it note a 2 or 3 or 4F experience that they want to create for themselves that day, sharing that with a friend or colleague, or and then checking in at the end of the day with that person and say, how'd that go? How'd that feel? So it's an interesting way at the end of the day to almost to practice a version of gratitude around this as well.
Yeah. Oh, this is awesome. I love it. I'm gonna go away and start to think about how I can do that, Sean.
Absolutely.
It's really, really good. And your example of the cooking and nurturing other people is one of my favorite things in life, when I actually have time to go to the market and spend a day in the kitchen and then bring together a big group of people around the table. That's completely my happy place. And I think you perhaps have just articulated better than I have ever why.
Well, there you go. Maybe we'll do that together, because that's what I love to do as well. It's a social dinner party. It's like
perfect.
It's one of my favorite things to do.
All right. Well, you're on. We're going to need to make that happen. Sean, in your video, you talk about some extensive research and science that demonstrates that our brains are magnets for the negative and Teflon for the positive, which is a bit scary, but I reckon that probably resonates with me quite well. Talk us through this and how the hell we can change it.
Well, the thing is that we're hardwired this way, right? So it's not necessarily, I think trying to change it is not necessarily the right approach. Okay. Being aware of it, first of all, right, is the main thing, because we've been taught, there's been different versions of this, I guess, negativity bias, essentially, that we talk about, right? So, we'll talk about how we used to be having to worry about saber-toothed tigers and things like that, and that is basically hardwired our brains to actually look for danger and things like this. That's a version of this, right? Okay. And so we can't necessarily change that, and it's in the same way that we can't get rid of our inner critic. It's always going to be there. But what we can do by being aware of it is we can actually focus on things which are work to manage that. So for instance, in mindfulness, they'll talk about distancing yourself, or just noticing your thoughts versus identifying with your thoughts.
Okay.
That are going past. So if you're having negative thoughts about yourself, just distancing yourself from them and just letting them pass. The reason we sort of say that our brains are magnets for the negative is that's what they're looking for. They're looking for danger, but they're Teflon for the positive, which means that's why we need to practice these things that make that stick. I guess, and this is where you see elements of positive psychology coming in terms of really focusing on two things that we think make a big difference and that we incorporate into the work that we're doing with our clients is, the first is using a positive psychology approach around focusing on our strengths versus our weaknesses.
Yes.
Right. So, and this is a great way of dealing with your inner critic, for instance. So our inner critic's often telling us everything that we're not.
Yes.
Whereas the focus on strengths is the focusing on what you are.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and I will say this for anything in life, really. Focus on what you are, not what you're not. Right. Focus on what you have, not what you don't have. You know, so get rid of that FOMO stuff and the comparison stuff to social media and things like that. That has no positive impact on you, right? Focus on what you have right now. And that's where gratitude comes in. And the research around gratitude shows that even just practicing for 3 minutes a day for a week has positive benefits for up to 6 months. Right. And this is where we need to go, okay? Because we have that negativity bias, we literally have to focus on the positive in order to really feel the impact. And the stuff with character strengths is a great free tool that you can do at a site called viacharacter.org, which is a positive psychology tool which identifies your character strengths.
Okay.
And the research behind character strengths shows that when we are aware of and using our character strengths every day, we're 6 times more likely to be engaged at work, and we're 3 times more likely to report having an excellent quality of life.
Wow.
And yeah, it's amazing the impact. This is the most powerful positive psychology intervention that we have available to us. And it's very simple. And what I love about character strengths is they're very human. They don't put you in a box.
Okay.
As other assessment tools or behavioral tools tend to do sometimes.
Yes.
And so they're very human things like creativity and bravery and perseverance and prudence, appreciation of beauty, you know, these sorts of things that are very human, that when we apply them, that's this version of ourselves. Most of us, when I talk to people, don't really understand what their strengths are. And if you are having a strengths-based conversation, it might be just once a year.
Sure. Yeah, sure. Which is hardly enough to embed it and really make you focus on it.
Totally.
Oh, I'm going to check afternoon. I think I think my afternoon's looking up to be very positive. Sean, you've got a really awesome exercise that helps people shift their mental energy in 10 seconds.
Yes.
What's that all about?
So this is drawn, I guess, from my first career in the fitness industry, and I taught dance for a number of years, and it's really linked to this practice of gratitude, right? So if you think we're grateful for something, because then transfer that feeling into a shimmy, and I'm shimmying right now, which is why my voice is so funny. And so sometimes gratitude can feel a bit heavy, right? And so what we say is, let's think about what makes us shimmy.
Yeah.
Right. And that could be a little shimmy that you feel on the inside where you're just like, that was good, you know, or a big shimmy that you witness when you've got a big celebration, you know. Yeah. And so we just like to talk about, you know, what makes us shimmy, and then obviously to get those shoulders moving as you do it.
Well,
and so I have a hashtag. The hashtag is shimmy a day, you know, and so I'll often share my little shimmies, you know, and often like these are shimmies and others too, right? And just sort of noticing when someone's proud or has achieved something, and just sort of checking in with them, because you know, when you hear someone talk about what they're grateful for, or you feel that yourself, right? The more that we can share these and make this a part of the conversation, the better.
Shimmy a day. I'm going to check that out.
So can I get you to shimmy right now? Do it for me. Move the shoulders.
Yep.
Come on.
Okay. I don't know if you can hear it, just as well as this is only audio, but if you want to see this happening, you need to watch Sean's video. It's awesome. His TED Talk. Sean, we could keep talking for hours. I've got one more question. We've talked mostly about individuals and how, and some of what we can all do to look after ourselves better. And you touched on it a little bit at the start, but I'd love to just briefly touch on the macro element of what you're talking about. And, you know, your video outlines the fact that energy crises cost the Australian economy a staggering $266 billion a year, which equates to 16% of the economy, which is absolutely staggering. Why are we not talking about this more?
That's such a good question, right? So this is an interesting thing for me, because normally I have a very positive view on things. I'm very optimistic. Yes. And for my TED Talk, I just thought, I wonder if I reversed the 4F framework, what would I find? Right. So instead of focusing on well-being, the outcome, if I focus on the risk, the unwellness, essentially.
Yes.
What would I find? And so when I looked at just very publicly available research as well, I found that there were 7 epidemics, essentially, that are impacting millions of Australians. And so from a fuel perspective, completely different is from the cost of, I guess, the most dysfunctional version of relationships. So domestic violence, and then also child neglect and abuse. And then from a focus point of view, I looked at stress and mental health.
Okay.
And so 7 epidemics that are impacting and very related in many ways, right? And so that figure was those all bunched up together, right? So those 7 epidemics costing the Australian economy $266 billion a year. And when you think about it, where we started this conversation, those are the extreme versions, right? So we're not even talking about the loss or the cost of what happens before that, when people are not at their best, around presenteeism or burnout, chronic stress, all of those things, which are not necessarily captured yet. And why I thought this was very important is, if you again look at a macro level, we've seen a stagnation. What is the weight that contributes to that? Which is this weight of unwellness? Is these 7 epidemics? How can we grow? How can we create, innovate, adapt? All of these things that are required for an economy to compete, where we diminish capacity and actually do all the things that are necessary to compete on a global stage.
Sure. Wow, it's definitely something that needs to be much more in the public dialogue, doesn't it?
Absolutely, and I think this is where we go. Will we get more focus on this when we really look at what the business case, is around this? That this is really important, because what we are finding is that when we do our assessments, we ask people questions from 2 contexts. So where they're at today versus where they'd like to be. And our job is simply to get people from A to B.
Yep.
But this language, I guess, or this idea of capacity that people have, and often you'll hear that word used in the negative. I don't have capacity for this.
I think I've almost only ever heard that talked about in a positive context.
Right. And what people are saying, that I'm very, very confident that what people are actually saying based on our data, is that what they're saying is my capacity is diminished, right? This is not my true capacity, right? Because actually where I see myself, which is where I've set my goals, is my true capacity, my potential capacity. And so my current capacity is diminished either by factors that are sort of outside of my control. So the system impacts of culture, leadership, that type of thing.
Yeah.
What's going on more generally in my life. And they're also diminished by the fact that we don't necessarily understand the behaviors that we need to be doing actually to look after ourselves. Right. So we've never been taught how to be well.
No. Well, right? most of those 7 factors that you outlined at the start are not things that we are taught or that are really discussed at all.
No, and what's scary in this, and you relate to this as well, is that this is then now starting to impact the next generation. So we already see that 20% of children are starting school obese.
20%?
So we're literally 20%. So imagine if 20% of the population actually never know what it feels like to be well.
And
That is scary.
Yeah, that is really scary.
And
haven't grown up with those skills of eating well and moving lots.
Absolutely. That's literally what we're looking at. I think this is why we're seeing these, starting to see these indicators where actually potentially life expectancy could go backwards in this next generation if we don't do something about it.
That's cause for, well, going back to what we talked about earlier, a sleepless night, or
that's a whole cast.
yeah, isn't it just? Well, Sean, we could keep talking for hours. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've taken a whole lot of notes with some research that I plan to go away and do myself this afternoon. I feel a whole lot more empowered, and that I have a whole lot more knowledge around looking after my energy and my wellness, and listeners are going to have that very same benefit. So I'm really grateful for your time and very much enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for helping me start my day with a shimmy.
I love it. Thanks, Sean. And thanks for listening to the Katie Talks podcast with me, Katie Bennett-Stenton. If you enjoyed this episode, please review me on iTunes so that you can help others find this great content. I have some excellent thought leaders coming up in the series. Subscribe so that you don't miss an episode. And I love feedback from listeners. You can find me at Katie B Marketing on Twitter or Katie Bennett-Stenton on LinkedIn.